Hello and welcome to another update. So in this one we'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line, starting out in the direction of Robotyne, where here there was reported to be a breakthrough in the direction of Verbove by the Ukrainian forces. However, this information is not true. We see that the Ukrainian forces are continuing their attacks in the direction of Verbove, and there was some video showing a Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle reaching Verbove, but it was destroyed at entrance, and since then there's been no further videos or any evidence of Ukrainian forces within the parts of the village. However, we do see videos of constant fighting to the west of it, and we even see the latest update by Deep State Map, which is a pro-Ukrainian source, showing that the Ukrainians did not only just not advance, but the map was clarified for them to actually be further back than was previously reported. So as we can see, the gray zone has expanded, but the Ukrainian zone of control is actually smaller than what was reported. So this is just another part of the information campaign, trying to exaggerate your own victories and get rid of your own losses from the media so that the morale stays high and so on. However, the issue here is that it didn't happen, so there's nothing to even exaggerate. They're just making stuff up. This is why I'm here. Well, what we do see is that in the direction of Novoprokopivka, we see that the Ukrainian forces have actually managed to reach the village itself, again here by the outskirts of it. This was a video which was recorded by a drone. I'm not going to show it because it is not something that YouTube allows. But what we do see is that two Ukrainian, I guess they are some sort of deep reconnaissance group, advanced towards this area, and it was actually filmed to be right here by the houses to the northeast of the village. The two Ukrainian soldiers right here, and a Russian soldier walking up behind them from this side here, and the fighting ends with the Russian one winning. So what we see is that the Ukrainian forces have reached the outskirts of Novoprokopivka with their reconnaissance groups. This means that it is only a matter of time until the Ukrainian forces start attacking Novoprokopivka, similarly to how they are attacking Verbove. The difference here is that there's no major defensive positions of the Russian forces to the north of Novoprokopivka. What we do see is that there are some minor fortifications to the northwest, which is why we're seeing it from the northeast, as the Ukrainian forces now have captured the high grounds to the north and to the northeast of Novoprokopivka. So this is all leveled ground, and the Ukrainian forces have a much easier time attacking the Russian positions here, as there's no fortifications. So the Ukrainian forces are now preparing to storm Novoprokopivka from the north and from the east, while the fighting is continuing in the direction of Verbove from the west. So the current situation is that the Ukrainian forces continue to build up their troops and do assaults on the different villages of Novoprokopivka and Verbove, trying to get a breakthrough, which hasn't happened yet. Something interesting that we see is that here in the direction of Robotyne, there is this video which was released by a pro-Russian source, which shows a drone flying over the village and showing the utter destruction of the village. There's hardly anything left. There's a few buildings standing still, but the majority of the village is essentially just gone. There's a lot of rubble, and there's hardly any hiding positions within it. It is clear that as soon as some sort of vehicle enters it, there's no hiding from the Russian artillery, and they're instantly bombarded, as we saw in the video in the previous video. So we're seeing that the Ukrainian forces are moving through these open fields. You can just see hundreds of meters in each direction, even kilometers in each direction. Anything that moves through is easily spotted. And this is why the Ukrainians are having such a hard time breaking through in this direction, because as soon as they gather any sort of force, even the small groupings that they do, they're instantly spotted. The question here is, how much is Russia able to keep up with the Ukrainian forces? Because it seems that the Russian forces, if they just shot enough shells, they would prevent any Ukrainian advances, but the Ukrainians are advancing anyways. This most likely indicates that the Ukrainians either have a way to stay undetected for most of the time, which is most likely reflected by them moving through the forest lines, There's also the possibility that the Russian artillery is not accurate enough or not numerous enough to be able to destroy the Ukrainian forces as soon as they're spotted, because we see that it is easy for the Russians to spot the Ukrainians. But the next part is the hard part, as the Ukrainians still manage to break through, advance, and so on. This is likely because the Russians are unable to defeat them in time. So we're seeing that the Ukrainian forces are pressuring the Russian forces simply by being faster than the Russian artillery. Now, if we take a look at the Russian fortifications, we see that the most likely area for the Ukrainians to advance in next is here in the direction of Novoprokopivka. As I mentioned, they have managed to capture the high grounds as well as the fortifications north of Novoprokopivka. With this, it is the most vulnerable area. So if the Ukrainian forces start attacking this with a armored assault or something similar, then they're able to capture it much easier than them pushing through at Verbove. The fighting continues by Verbove as the Ukrainian forces try to capture further parts of these fortifications, but it seems so far that they are unable to send a larger assault group on there or get a breakthrough within the village. They've managed to reach the very outskirts of it, but that's about it. And we're seeing that the fighting continues in this direction very heavily. We then move on to the Vremevsky Ledge area, where here fighting continues to the east of Urushaine, but there's nothing really to report here. So let's move on to the Klishivka area, where here the Ukrainian forces have managed to advance and push the Russians back from the rail lines and beyond the river line here to the east of Klishivka. They've gathered a larger portion of the area here in between the Klishivka area and the high grounds to the east. So with this, the Ukrainian forces are likely going to push further northwards. So the sort of fighting we see here is similar to that of Robotyne. The terrain is similar, but we also see the fact that the Ukrainian forces are advancing within the village, pushing northwards, and in the northwestern parts as well as here to the southeast, we see them push on a singular front, one line. So they are essentially just advancing partially in one direction and then pushing in a different direction. This forces the Russians to respond to every one of them separately, and as such they are splitting up their own forces, and then the Ukrainians can then focus their own in one direction. So it is essentially a mind game between the two sides, who can gather the most forces against the least amount of forces to gain the biggest advantage. And what we're seeing is that the Ukrainian forces are splitting their forces in these three parts, pushing them one by one, and every time they manage to advance a further bit, whether it's a field or it's a hilltop or it's a village, we see them advancing bit by bit, and they have been doing so for the most of this month. We're seeing that the month of September has been fairly successful compared to August. It seemed that in August, the offensive of the Ukrainian forces was falling down, slowing down, and reaching a halt. But in the September month, it just increased again, and they've managed to advance all across the front, both in the direction of Robotyne, but also in the direction of Klishivka. And this is where we end off this update, and I'm going to end it here. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.